What can we learn from reflecting on the surviving fragments of Heraclitus, the Pre-Socratic philosopher? Many of his pithy sayings inspired the later Cynic and Stoic philosophers and the Church Fathers, including Clement of Alexandria and Hippolytus of Rome. These sayings by Heraclitus include, God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, plenty and hunger. Life and death are the same, so are waking and sleeping, youth and age. Man is called a baby by God, even as a child by man. Asses prefer straw to gold. All things are in a state of flux, and man's character is his fate. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along on the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. Philosophy was not invented by Socrates and Plato. They were influenced by the pre-Socratic philosophers. The first philosophers hail from the Greek colonies on the Ionian coast, which is Turkey today. Heraclitus was an aristocrat born in Ephesus about 100 years before Socrates. And Ephesus was a part of the kingdom of Libya, and Lydia fell to the Medes and Persians in 547 BC. We read about the struggle in Herodotus. So Ephesus was a part of the satrapy of the Persian Empire when Heraclitus was alive. Though the cultural impact was minimal, as the satrapies were self-governing, there were Persian influences, and how extensive these were, we can only guess. As Copleston puts it, Heraclitus was a melancholy man of aloof and solitary temperament who expressed his contempt for the common herd of citizens and also for the eminent men of the past. He relinquished his hereditary office of basileus, or leading local official, to his brother. Heraclitus's main work on nature is lost to history. Only fragments and quotations from other authors survive. These fragments are quoted more than any other pre-Socratic philosophers by ancient, medieval, and modern philosophers. In particular, he is quoted by Marcus Aurelius, Aristotle, St. Hippolytus in Rome, and St. Clement of Alexandria. We have no shortage of paintings of Heraclitus, and in Raphael's School of Athens, two philosophers are seated in front of Plato and Socrates. To the left is Heraclitus, and to the right is the Cynic philosopher Diogenes of Sinope. Now, in medieval paintings, Heraclitus is often depicted seated next to another pre-Socratic philosopher, Democritus, who was a teacher of Protagoras, the sophist in Plato's dialogue. Now, this is an artistic convention. It is highly unlikely that they met. Democritus lived in Abdera in Thrace, far from Ephesus, in the generation after Heraclitus. And Democritus is best known for his belief that atoms were the building blocks of all matter. Aristotle calls him Heraclitus the Obscure. Many of his surviving fragments are puzzling. If his main lost work is ever found, we can then guess less about its meaning. We know that many ancient authors quoted him from his original work, and perhaps one day some future magical CAT scan type device can read the volumes in the volcano-baked library of Herculaneum that locks many ancient works in charred papyrus. Since we are more interested in reflecting how Christians and philosophers interpreted Heraclitus' sayings than the writings themselves, since only fragments survive, we will reflect on them author by author. And the most significant author, of course, is Diogenes of Laertius. We know little of Diogenes' life, but he was an ancient historian in the 3rd century AD. And in Book 9, he includes short biographies of the latter pre-Socratic philosophers, starting with Heraclitus, and including two sophists known from their Platonic dialogues, Protagoras and Parmenides. Diogenes is both a valuable and problematic source, and at times he seems more gullible than was Herodotus, and scholars are skeptical of his more outlandish statements. Diogenes says that Heraclitus was exceptionally haughty and disdainful, as is clear from his book, in which he says, "Much learning does not teach understanding, otherwise it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras." Also, he used to say that Homer should be thrown out of the public contest and beaten with a stick. Plato's Socrates also condemned Homer, banning poets from his Republic. And some quick sayings from Heraclitus. You should extinguish pride more quickly than a fire, which some translators render as, you should extinguish violence more quickly than arson, and the people should defend the law as they would their city wall. Diogenes of Laertius has a curious account of how Heraclitus died. Having become a misanthrope, he departed for the mountains, where he lived on grass and herbs. Perhaps this inspired the later Cynic philosophers, and in particular Diogenes of Sinope, who spurned property and lived in a barrel in the market. And our historian continues, but when this diet gave Heraclitus dropsy, where fluid is retained in the legs, He returned to town and asked the doctors enigmatically if they could produce a drought after heavy rain. When they failed to understand him, he buried himself in a cowshed, hoping the heat of the cow dung would draw the fluid out of him. But even as this had no effect, he died at the age of 60. Now, in the ancient world, noblemen and warriors died the noble death, and this ignoble death of Heraclitus suggests that the locals in Ephesus did not think highly of him. Otherwise, they would have remembered that Heraclitus had died a much more noble death. And of course, the most noble death of all was Leonidas at the Thermopylae Pass, where he fought to the death with his 300 Spartan compatriots. And Diogenes of Laertia says that Heraclitus' doctrines are as follows: all things are made of fire, and into fire they are dissolved. All things come about by fate, and it is by the conversion of opposites that beings are brought into harmony. Now, perhaps he was influenced by the fact that the Persian overlords worshipped fire. Now, the ancients speculated that everything was made from 4 basic elements: wind or air, water, earth, and fire. Which was the primary element was disputed among the pre-Socratic philosophers. Heraclitus thought it was fire, Thales thought it was water, and Alexander thought it was air. Other philosophers said the elemental substance could be transformed into these 4 elements. Was the end of the world as depicted by the book of Revelation influenced by speculations that fire was the predominant element? Were the stories of the primordial flood that engulfed the world influenced by speculations that water was the predominant element? We do know that these 4 basic elements were core to the ancient Greeks' view of the world. Many of the Heraclitus fragments are quotes from the Church Fathers, St. Clement of Alexandria and St. Hippolytus of Rome in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. St. Clement was deeply influenced by Plato and the Stoic philosophers, and many of his quotes seek to show how the Greek moral philosophers echoed truths found in Scripture. St. Clement claimed that the Greeks plagiarized the Hebrews, but few scholars, if any, agree with his argument. St. Clement was a catechetical teacher in Alexandria. Origen was among his students. Although he is considered a saint, he is not widely venerated in the Orthodox and Catholic churches, as some of his teachings were later determined to be suspect and possibly heretical. And in our presentation, the quotes that are embedded from Heraclitus are in italics. And Clement says, Proverbs exhorts us, let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of water in the street. From Heraclitus, most people do not understand the things that they experience, nor do they know when they have learned. But they seem to themselves to do so, according to the good Heraclitus. So you see that he too finds fault with unbelievers. So Heraclitus here is predicting the Dunning-Kruger effect. Heraclitus and the other Ionian muses say explicitly that most men who think themselves wise follow the popular singers and obey the laws, not knowing that most men are bad and few are good, but that the best pursue reputation. And here's the quote. For the best, Heraclitus says, choose one thing in return for all, ever-flowing fame from mortals. But most men satisfy themselves like beasts, measuring happiness by the belly and the genitals and the most shameful parts in us. Heraclitus caustically remarks that some people are without faith. They do not know how to hear or even to speak, and he was aided here by Solomon in Ecclesiasticus. If thou desire to hear, thou shalt receive, and if thou incline thine ear, thou shalt be wise. Knowledge and ignorance are the boundaries of happiness and unhappiness. For philosophical men must be versed in very many things, according to Heraclitus, and it is indeed necessary to make many journeys in the search to be good. And Clement continues, here the apostle exhorts us in 1 Corinthians that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, who promise to persuade you, but in the power of God, which in itself and without proofs has the power to save by faith alone. As the Ephesian Heraclitus says, for the most esteemed of men knows and guards what he believes. And moreover, justice will convict the fashioners and witnesses of falsehoods. For Heraclitus learned from foreign philosophy about the purification through fire of those who have lived evil lives. And Clement says, I know that Plato too supports Heraclitus when he writes, the one alone is the wise, unwilling and willing to be called by the name of Zeus. And again, it is law also to follow the counsel of the one. As Luke states, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And you will find it expressed as follows by the Ephesian Heraclitus. The uncomprehending, when they hear, are like the deaf. The saying applies to them, though present they are absent. The scriptures in 1 Timothy exhort, the law is not made for a righteous man. Thus, Heraclitus rightly says, they would not know the name of justice if these things did not exist. And Socrates says that the law would not have come into being for the sake of the good. Heraclitus states, gods and men honor those slain in battle. And St. Hippolytus of Rome also has many Heraclitus fragments. Although Hippolytus of Rome was an influential 2nd century theologian, little is known about him. Scholars are not sure either of his identity or his community. St. Photius I of Constantinople claims he was an apostle of St. Irenaeus, but scholars doubt this. St. Hippolytus includes quotes from the Greek philosophers in his refutation of all heresies. In his summary of the philosophy of Heraclitus, he comments on his intellectual arrogance. Heraclitus, a natural philosopher of Ephesus, surrendered himself to universal grief, condemning the ignorance of the entirety of life, and of all mortal men in their existence. For he asserted that he himself knew everything, whereas the rest of mankind know nothing. Nevertheless, Heraclitus' philosophy includes much wisdom. Both he and Empedocles said that the originating principle of all things is discord and friendship, and that the deity is a fire blazing with intelligence, and that all things are unified and never stand still. However, the world around us is full of evil things, and these evil things reach as far as the moon. Heraclitus says that the universe is divisible and indivisible, generated and ungenerated, mortal and immortal, word and eternity, Father and Son, God and justice. Listening not to me but to the universal, it is wise to agree that all things are one. Heraclitus states that the universe is a child and an eternal king of all things for eternity. Eternity is a child at play, playing draughts. The kingdom is a child's kingdom. Heraclitus states that the father of everything that has come about is generated and ungenerated, creature and creator. In his direct quote, war is father of all, king of all. Some of it shows us gods, some as men, some it makes slaves, some free. And we are always reminded that the ancient Greek world is a warrior society, with roots in the warrior ethos of the Iliad and the Odyssey, where if your city-state is defeated, it is pillaged and plundered, and your military-aged men are slaughtered, and your women and children are sold into slavery. And you can also be enslaved when you're captured by pirates. Heraclitus praises and admires the unknown and unseen part of God's power above the known part. That he is visible to men and not undiscoverable, he says in the following words. I honor more those things which are learned by sight and hearing, he says, the visible more than the invisible. God is unapparent, unseen, unknown to men, as Heraclitus says. Unapparent connection is better than apparent. And Aristotle was right when he calls him Heraclitus the Obscure. Heraclitus explicitly says, immortals are mortal, mortals are immortal, living their death, dying their life. And Heraclitus speaks of a resurrection of this visible flesh in which we are born. And he is aware that God is the cause of this resurrection, saying, they are said to rise up and to become wakeful guardians of the living and the dead. And elsewhere we have fragments and quotes of Heraclitus, starting with, men fail to notice what they do when they are awake, just as they forget what they do when they are asleep. It is better to hide folly than to make it public. It is not good for men to get all they want. To be temperate is the greatest excellence, and wisdom is speaking the truth and acting with knowledge in accordance with nature. All men can know themselves and be temperate. And here Heraclitus is adding good advice to this famous inscription at the temple of the Delphic oracle. Sextus Empiricus says Heraclitus rejects perception when he says, bad witnesses for men are the eyes and ears of those who have foreign souls, as foreign souls trust in non-rational perceptions. The Neoplatonist philosopher Porphyry, in his notes on Homer's Iliad, comments, they say it is indecent if the sight of warfare pleases the gods. But it is not indecent, for the noble deeds please the gods. Again, wars and battles seem terrible to us, but to God not even they are terrible. For God makes all things contribute to the harmony of the universe, so Heraclitus says that to God all things are fair and just, but men have supposed some things unjust and others just. Now, we're not suggesting that this observation is moral or just. We do suggest that this illustrates the Stoic forbearance with which many ancients faced the inequities and violence they often faced in a warrior society. Plato, in his Hippias Major dialogues, asks, don't you realize the truth of Heraclitus' remark that the most beautiful ape is ugly when compared with other species? Doesn't Heraclitus also say that the wisest of men, when compared to a god, will seem an ape in wisdom and beauty and everything else? Aristotle says that surely nature longs for opposites and affects her harmony from them. That was also said by Heraclitus the Obscure. Combinations, wholes and not wholes, concurring differently, concordant disconcordance, from all things one and from one all things. In this way, the structure of the universe, of the heavens and the earth and the whole world, was arranged by one harmony through the blending of the most opposite principles. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, says, it seems that each animal has its own pleasure. The pleasures of horses, dogs, and men differ, So Heraclitus says that donkeys would prefer rubbish to gold, since it is tastier. Finally, we'll review Frederick Copleston's The Word of Heraclitus. Frederick Copleston was an English Jesuit priest and professor whose multi-volume history of philosophy was included in the curriculum of Catholic colleges worldwide. He is best known for his public debate on the existence of God with Bertrand Russell, and also for his debate with A.J. Ayer. Although Heraclitus is best known for his saying, "You cannot step twice in the same river, for fresh waters are ever flowing in upon you," he may not have been the first to proclaim that all things are in a state of flux. Although this is an important assertion he makes, Copleston argues that what is key is Heraclitus' emphasis on the logos, or word, on his special message to mankind, which consists in the conception of unity in diversity and difference in unity. Why was the philosophy of Heraclitus attractive both to the Stoic philosophers and to many early Christian theologians? Copleston states, "For Heraclitus, the conflict of opposites, so far from being a blot on the unity of the one, is essential to the being of the one. In fact, the one only exists in the tension of the opposites. This tension is essential to the unity of the one." And he continues, "For Heraclitus, reality is one, but it is many at the same time, not merely accidentally, but essentially. It is essential to the being and existence of the one that it should be one and many at the same time, that it should be identity and difference." And Heraclitus argued that the essence of all things is fire. Although he did base this on practical observations, this took on the firmness of a religious belief and was the founding principle of his philosophy. As Copleston paraphrases Heraclitus, "Sense experience tells us that fire lives by feeding, by consuming and transforming into itself heterogeneous matter. Springing up, as it were, from a multitude of objects, it changes them into itself. Without the supply of material, it would die down and cease to exist. The very existence of fire depends on this strife and tension." Heraclitus speaks of the one as God, as wise. The wise is the one only. He is unwilling and willing to be called by the name of Zeus. Now, the Stoic philosophers whom he inspires interchangeably refer to the one as God and as Zeus. He is the unitary expression of the truth of all the other gods. And although this feels like monotheism, scholars refer to this as henotheism. As Copleston explains, God is the universal reason, the universal law immanent in all things, binding all things into a unity and determining the constant change in the universe according to universal law. Man's reason is a moment in this universal reason, and man should strive to live by this reason, realizing the unity of all things in the reign of unalterable law. And here he refers to this law as the word, or logos. By stressing universal law and man's participation in reason, Heraclitus helped to pave the way for the universalist ideals of Stoicism. Copleston explains that this unity in many is appealing to Christian theologians, as God is one in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. God himself, as we know by revelation, is unity in the distinction of persons. In Christ there is unity and diversity, unity of person and diversity of natures, that is, the divine and human natures of Christ. However, though there is much in the philosophy of Heraclitus that is reflected in Stoic philosophy, and also in the Christian reflections on the nature of God, Copleston does not reflect on whether Heraclitus' philosophy of unity and opposites might have been influenced by the Persian Zoroastrian dualism of his overlords, with this everlasting contest between the cosmic forces of good and evil. This dualism is suggested particularly by the saying by Heraclitus, "Good and bad are the same. Goodness and badness are one." We discussed this Persian dualism in our review of St. Augustine's Confessions. St. Augustine was a member of the Manichaean heresy for a decade, before he converted back to the Catholic Church. And Manichaeism was a syncretistic faith that blended Zoroastrianism with Christianity to form a competing Gnostic religious system. There is so much that we do not know for certain about the philosophy of Heraclitus. Maybe one day his original work on nature will be resurrected from the ashes of history. Now we'll discuss the sources we use for this video. Our main source is this compilation of fragments and quotations of early Greek philosophy by Penguin Classics. The editor sorted these sayings by topics. We arranged them by author. We like this translation by Jonathan Barnes, as well as his useful commentary. And the bracketed B references are for the Diels Crayons B texts. And for an explanation, see the appendices. These quotations include the biography of Heraclitus and the ancient lives of eminent philosophers by Diogenes of Laertius, who likely lived in the 3rd century, And this volume also includes many interesting scholarly essays on Diogenes and Greek philosophy in the appendix. We like the footnote in early Greek philosophy that Diogenes' lives is derivative. It contains simplifications, confusions, and some nonsense, but it remains a valuable source for the Pre-Socratics and for later Greek philosophy. It is valuable because it is the most extensive source for many of these philosophers, many who would be unknown if not for the brief mention by Diogenes. We found the chapter on Heraclitus in Frederick Copleston's volume on Greek and Roman philosophy to be essential in understanding how his philosophy fits into early Christian theology. As always, Will Durant in his Life of Greece and the Story of Civilization series offer many additional insights and is as quotable as it always is. And the collection of fragments in the early Greek philosophy book does include those quotes from St. Hippolytus of Rome and Clement of Alexandria. But they're also in the printed edition of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, plus some other information. And in our blog, we included the footnote references for these two works, but we want to warn you, if you want to read them for yourselves, the works of Clement of Alexandria sprawl over hundreds of pages and are disorganized, even by Stoic standards. Sometime in the future, we plan to do videos on both of these church fathers. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.